So, as Julius was laying out, we have a suite of challenges facing our energy grid, our industrial build-out, and all of that, and we have three excellent people to talk about those challenges. We have Emily Domenech, the Executive Director of the Permitting Council. We have Michael Buschbacher over at Boyden Gray, and we have Richard Meyer, the VP of the American Gas Association. I'd like to welcome you all. So for my first question, I think what would be really useful before we dive into specifics is just to get a read on the state of the grid as it encounters all of this demand from onshoring, the AI boom, and all of that. And I'd like to hear a little bit from each of you on that. Emily, I'd like to start with you.
So the state of the grid, I think, is one, we know we have a grid that's aging, and two, we know we're going to have a growing demand and stress that's put on that grid as we go forward. There's been a lot of talk lately about how the estimates for our power needs for AI in the future are overestimated, but the reality is that if we're putting more things on the grid, particularly from AI and manufacturing, we're going to need to grow our energy demand for really the first time in a long time. We've seen pretty flat energy demand in the United States with improvements in efficiencies and other things across the board. So this is a new problem for us to deal with here. And we know that, frankly, when we approach this problem, that it's way too hard to build things in the United States, and it takes too long, and our process is too complicated. And if we want to be able to compete with China, particularly on the AI front, then we're going to have to be able to solve some of those problems to be able to support the grid better. So I think it's a really interesting conversation for us to be having today to sort of kick off this event and thinking about what are the different ways we can kind of come at this problem to address the growing need we have for power in America.
All right, fantastic. Michael, let's hear from you.
So the situation we've had has been before demand was projected to increase even was bad because the way in which our subsidy system and the way in which we regulate the grid was driving away stable baseload power from nuclear, from coal, and transitioning it to intermittent sources, and that undermines the reliability of the grid. And as that's gone further, with the increase in demand, it sort of creates an almost impossible situation where we're really in a pinch. And that pinch, I think, has three causes. One is you have market distorting subsidies, and two, you have a system of regulation that allows for those market distorting subsidies to externalize, for intermittents to externalize the costs of reliability outside of themselves to the grid as a whole and to the ratepayers who pay for it. And then three, you have an inordinate number of permitting barriers and sort of lawfare concerns that prevent bringing on nuclear again, and also making natural gas available the way it should be, pipeline permitting, things like that. So something has to give, and we're at a moment now where I think many of those things are in flux and could and should change. And the question now is whether this administration, policymakers, are able to deliver on that.
Well, right, let's just step back and look at where we're at today. The investments are being made in the race for manufacturing, for AI investments. And for America to lead, we need to lead on energy. The limiting factor right now is our ability to get scalable and reliable energy in place to meet this demand challenge. And on AI specifically, leadership means scaling compute. So we need sovereign compute, sovereign manufacturing, and that means sovereign fuel that's dispatchable. All of this is happening in an immensely challenged grid environment. It was already challenged in terms of meeting reliability challenges 3 years ago, and that's only getting worse as demand scales to meet this new global challenge. Just a couple numbers. If we look at just AI, the International Energy Administration saying we're going from from around 200 terawatt hours of electricity demand just for data centers alone this year to about 450 by the end of the decade. That's consistent with a 15% year-over-year growth, the highest case that EPRI projected last year in its analysis. So this is just an immense challenge, both for the grid and the primary energy inputs that are going to satisfy that demand.
Okay, thank you all. So what I'm hearing is that we have a suite of challenges we're dealing with here. We've got permitting stuff, we've got malinvestment, perhaps in the wrong types of resources, and we're also being caught a little bit wrong-footed in terms of our trend for lower energy demand and now suddenly handling this boom in the context of all of these other things. Do I have that right from you guys?
That's fair.
Okay, great. Well, okay, so I want to pivot back to you, Richard, immediately on this, because natural gas has been such a huge workhorse for our grid. And it seems like if anybody wanted reliable power anywhere built very quickly, they could rely on natural gas turbines to deploy. But right now, we seem to be seeing prolonged order books for new turbines. And upstream, we have low oil prices, which might be impacting the amount of gas we get from associated oil drilling. So I would just like a little bit more detail on you. What's going on in the natural gas sector as it pertains to the grid? What are the challenges you foresee?
When it comes to natural gas use in the power sector, we've effectively doubled the amount of generation from natural gas over the past 2 decades. Today, 40% of natural gas consumption goes to the power sector, and a little more than 40% of the electrons or the electric generation comes from natural gas. So it is the workhorse. It's a workhorse for that baseload, reliable generation. It's a workhorse to provide that flexible, stable generation to meet increasing shares of variable renewables on the grid. And it's going to be the workhorse to meet this new manufacturing and AI demand. When it comes to the overall market, we are blessed with an abundance of natural gas here. And really, geology is not the limiting factor. I could cite you all sorts of statistics on record future natural gas resources and reserves and so forth. The limiting factor is us. It's our policy. It's our choice to build the infrastructure to move and store gas from where it's produced to where it's used. And we need to build more here at home. And, I don't know what the future really is going to look like in terms of this new demand growth. I think that's actually the wrong question. It doesn't matter if it's 30 gigawatts of new gas-fired capacity we're going to need or 60 or whatever it is. The question is, how are we going to build it? Now, you talked about supply chains. Yes, if you are now coming to, buy a turbine, you're going to be waiting in line for a while because the whole world is looking for gas to meet not only demand here at home, but across the globe. And the last thing I'll say, it's not just on turbines, it's also electrical equipment, switch gears, transformers, and so forth. This is a supply chain crunch that's affecting the entire industry.
That seems to confirm some of my scariest suspicions about what might be going on in that sector. Do you guys have anything to add on that?
Well, the turbine shortage is not because all of a sudden there's unexpected demand. It's because there were ESG commitments and plans that the GEs and Siemens of the world made, saying that this is basically a legacy technology that's going to be phased out quite quickly. We're going to be net zero by 2035. Like that's all false. And so now you see this crunch where it's like, turns out reality is coming faster than they expected and in a different way than I think a lot of folks expected. And it's not like there were no warning signs about that. And it just shows, I think, the importance of really radically course correcting and stopping with the fake nonsense about we can meet this with technologies that are unproven to go to scale at the grid, because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I'd also just add that I think the comments you made on gas apply to all of our natural resources. We are really, truly a resource-abundant country, and we often say, well, we don't really like those resources, or it doesn't make us feel good to produce them in our backyard, or maybe we should just let this happen in another part of the world so that we feel better about ourselves. And none of that does anything to make the United States a more secure or economically free place. And frankly, industries like yourself produce things cleaner here in the United States than they do anywhere else, and we should be doubling down on those resources, not the other way around. And movements away from that, not just in policy, but also in posture, are what led to the kinds of decisions like, mothballing your plans for building gas turbines because you think the administration might do one thing or another in the future. So we have to think beyond just what are the policies of the current administration, but also what's that posture and what does that long-term posture mean for where people make investments?
So one of the narratives that seems to tie all this together is the downfall of the energy transition dream to just variable, renewable energy.
I mean, it was always a fake dream, right?
Well, yes, as many dreams are when you wake up from them. So I'd like to hear from all of you here a little bit about where are we at with renewables. The last administration, they seemed to be the only thing that mattered in energy, and now they feel almost like a footnote. Do I have that right? Or is there a different story going on underneath all the talk?
Who wants to go first?
I mean, I think that the sort of reports of the death of renewables are greatly exaggerated. I think there's sort of a sound case for putting renewables on the grid up to maybe like 15% before, at least with existing kind of battery and storage and transmission technology, it doesn't make much sense to go further. But we still have all those incentives in place. There's a debate on the Hill right now about what's going to go in, what's going to go out. And there's a move, I think, that, hey, we want to subsidize as many electrons as we can. I think that's fine up to a point, but if you have renewables getting so much subsidy, which they still do, that they're getting on the grid and kicking off the grid, stable baseload coal and nuclear and things like that, that's a real problem, and that's only making the problems that the grid faces right now even worse.
I would say I think we have to be thinking about what provides the most value to the American consumer. And different administrations have created a system of value that is different based on who's in power. So in this case, we are really looking at emphasizing things that are reliable and affordable. And then the third thing I think is produced in the United States. So on the other side, I think folks, frankly, during the Biden administration, they very much valued what's the emissions content? Is it renewable? Is it made with U.S. manufacturing? They had a different value set that they applied to the grid. Unfortunately, the end result of that was policies that led to a situation where we have, wind power in Texas, for example, consistently selling at negative pricing and still making a profit because of a federal tax incentive. That's not a sustainable business model. It was never going to be a sustainable business model. And I think we have to move, particularly for emerging technology, and I include things, this is beyond renewables too. We have to move from a system where we have the federal government just like throwing money at the problem mindlessly and not thinking about what the next generation consequences might be, to a system where we say, how do we get you to be a competitive technology in a mostly free market? That's the direction we should be going. And unfortunately, I think the way that we've gone with our tax policy has really been, this has to exist in perpetuity forever, or these technologies will never be truly competitive or never really be the right choice to build here in the United States. And that just doesn't work. And all it's done is sort of divorce the grid from reality.
I'll just say there's a lot of perspectives on the past and evolving policy environment. I'll come at this from a more agnostic perspective because we represent energy utilities that are responsible for providing that safe, reliable, and affordable energy. And so AGA represents the gas utilities. Many of our companies are electric and gas utilities. And if you looked at any realistic analysis over the next 20 years, even in an energy transition scenario, natural gas was never going anywhere. Maybe in terms of volumes, you might consume less, but the capacity requirements, the infrastructure that serve these generation plants, that only continues to grow. And that's what we're seeing today as we've kind of reversed course and realized, well, no, we're not just in a flat load environment that we were the last 20 years. We're growing. And we're going to continue to see a transition. There's going to be growth in renewables. There's going to be growth in gas. We're going to see some level of coal retirements, which gas and other resources are going to start to backfill. So this is an evolving scenario, and all I know is that gas is going to remain a critical part of the mix for a very long time.
Well, that sounds about right to me. I think we're always going to need, as you said, that flexible power to ramp up when we need it, it seems, no matter what. So one thing that seems to impact all of these resources is just clearing the gauntlet of permitting, getting things through. And Emily, I wanted to ask you this. Where are we at with permitting? I hope we're in a better place than we have been, but I'd just like a broad overview from you.
So I would say there's sort of two different ways to think about permitting reform. One is, what can the executive branch do under the power of a president who wants to build to make it easier to get through the federal permitting system? We're seeing a lot of movement in that space. We're seeing CEQ really go forward and say, hey, we've got to clear the deck of these regulations that have exploded over time since NEPA was originally put in place. We need to get to a much clearer, more concise, more shortened time frames, shortened page numbers, all the things that are in the statutes that we passed, particularly in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. There's a lot of movement to make the executive branch regulatory state reflect what's in the statutes. That's all really good stuff. There's also the administration looking to lean in on things like the Permitting Council to say, hey, we want to put more projects on this dashboard. We want to give more projects access to this assistance that helps you get through that complex process, to have somebody Sherpa you through the process from start to finish, to get some of that transparent timeline. We want to use all the tools that we have. But at the end of the day, we have these tools and we're trying to execute them in the best way we can in a relatively broken system that needs to be fixed by Congress. The major issue for most of the permitting questions becomes, one, is this something that really requires a federal permitting process? That's that sort of major federal action trigger. That's something Congress has to fix. The second thing is, how long until I'm going to get sued and who has to pay for that lawsuit? That's what project developers have to think of before they make investments in the United States. And the judicial review piece of permitting reform, while there are some actions the executive can take, and I'm certain that we will take them, that is still something that Congress really needs to act decisively on. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in a loop where the people who don't want to build things in America make it really difficult for folks like you to invest. So we have to be able to work with Congress to move some of those things forward. I still think there's a real opportunity to do that during this Congress. We have a lot of folks who are bullish on this. We have Democrats who have come to the table on this who weren't there, certainly were not there 5 or 10 years ago when I was working on permitting when I first got to the Hill. And so I think we've made a lot of progress, but we really do have to, we cannot rely on the fact that Donald Trump wants to build things in America. And all of his cabinet secretaries want to build things in America. That's really great, and it's going to be really great to set us up for the next 4 years and hopefully for some time after that, but it's not going to last forever, and that's when Congress has to step in and do its job. So I think we've made a lot of progress, but like for my Hill friends in the room, we still have stuff to do.
I'll just add that last week the Supreme Court had a really excellent decision on NEPA that had, like, it's every sentence in that decision seems to be written to like be quoted in briefs going forward. And you know what the issue in that case was like there's some rail spur in Utah, and it was like, do you need to consider downstream climate effects resulting from refining that happens in the Gulf of America? And are you going to have to consider environmental justice, in other words, like racial impact on communities that are near refineries? Like that was the extent of the absurdity. And the Supreme Court took it and has a very good decision getting rid of that. But of course, that decision's only as powerful as how the agencies implement it. And like there is a lot of momentum, especially once you get further down the chain of convincing people who have never done it this way to do it the way that the statute actually says. And then you've also got the courts, right? So judicial review, and that's the main driver of all the problems with NEPA, I think, and with permitting generally. So whether that sticks with the lower courts, whether the Supreme Court waits another 2 decades to take another NEPA case is going to be a big determinant on how effective that decision is in practice.
Yeah, I just want to add to that I think this particular case is really reflective of the response we've seen from the courts on the NEPA reforms in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We took a little bit of a risk using that sort of reasonably foreseeable language, and we really felt that the court would interpret it the way that it has. But we needed to kind of wait and see how the case law turned out, and it's been very validating for the work that we did to put that in place to limit the scope of where these reviews should go. It's certainly not the way that the Biden White House thought it would go when they agreed to that language.
I'll just say one thing. We have to have permitting reform. I agree with Emily that Congress really has to address some major issues. We have specific issues that we're focused on that relate to either natural gas transmission or distribution. I won't bore anyone with this, but just one anecdote that I heard back in March at CERAWeek, a CEO of one of the biggest pipeline companies in the world said that today the cost of permitting a pipeline is twice the cost of the pipe itself. And so that is the challenge that we need to address.
Yeah, and that's true. We talk about NEPA a lot when we talk about permitting, but for a gas pipeline, you're dealing with the Clean Water Act, you're dealing with Endangered Species Act, you're dealing with the National Historic Preservation Act. You have a pile of environmental laws that are from 40 years ago that haven't been updated to reflect what our needs are in this country, and certainly haven't been updated to reflect our need to compete with China. So we are long overdue to do this work, and I really do. Like linear infrastructure in particular really gets hit by some of the broader like Clean Water Act related concerns that frankly Congress hasn't really done the work to fix.
So since this touches everything, I just want to ask Emily a brief follow-up question about how broad you see the Permitting Council's powers are to approve new projects outside the 200 million threshold. What's that look like for you?
Yeah, so we have sort of two functions for bringing projects under the coverage of the FAST 41 process. One is that FAST 41 covered project, which we have, we have 38 projects on the dashboard now that get that whole sort of full service work from the permitting council. So you get somebody who goes with you from start to finish, you get a transparent timeline, you work with the lead agencies, we hold all of those agencies accountable. Every time somebody misses a deadline, it gets published, and we use the sort of like shame game to get people to stay in line and stay on time. And then we have a whole other function, which we call transparency projects, which gives us a lot more flexibility. So those projects that fall under that first category have to be of a certain size and scope. They have to be at least a $200 million investment here in the United States. Our transparency projects can be smaller, and we've been using it in cooperation with the NEDC and the White House as a tool to really sort of close deals and get things built. We're looking at all of the projects we've listed. It's 24 projects to date. Have all been projects that either have like one permit that they've been waiting for 10 years, and we're going to come in and try to fix that one project quickly, or they're at the very end of their permitting timeline and they just need like one more thing to get to groundbreaking. So the goal there is to get as many projects on the dashboard as we can and to really take advantage of that sort of, we can shine a spotlight on this issue and I can pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, when are we going to move this permit? It's a really effective, it's a shockingly effective tool to just have people in the right place at the right time to pick up the phone and move things forward. Because again, in this administration, every single deputy secretary wants to get things built. They're just running a department. They don't have time to meet with project developers every single day. That's where we come in to sort of help be that conduit. But I've said this before, in a perfect world, you don't need the permitting council because this whole system is transparent and you know what you're getting from start to finish as a project developer when you decide to make an investment in the United States. That has to be the long-term goal. And everything that we try to do has to be, maybe we can grow the permitting council's footprint because we do have 19 sectors we can serve. Everything from manufacturing to AI to pipelines to roads, we got the whole gambit, right? So we really do want to be able to expand where we use this tool we already have, but really we need to fix the system so we don't need extra tools to get around it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with the last few minutes here, still have so much we could talk about. I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the new kids on the block, so to speak, nuclear and geothermal, which seem to be rising in prominence and importance to meet the energy dominance goals of this administration and to sort of really upscale American manufacturing. We just saw 4 big EOs on it. So I'd love to get a read from people on where you think these technologies are right now, what challenges they face, whether they're from permitting or any other thing.
And the main challenge with nuclear is regulatory. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is sort of famous as kind of like the biggest arch villain of like, their regulations really are kind of art for art's sake. They don't ever actually want anything to get built, and almost nothing ever does get built. And so one of the EOs, reforming the NRC, talks about reforming the culture and moving away from, this is a classic expertise problem, but if you're an expert in one thing, that looms really large in your field of vision. And so safety, being one of the core parts of NRC's mission, has come to the point where it just overwhelms everything else. Like, refineries blow up all the time, right? They do. I love refineries, but they do. And there are problems. All the time's an exaggeration. It happens with some frequency.
One going off right now.
Freak gasoline fight accidents, all that kind of thing. No, so but nuclear is very safe, and so there are all kinds of opportunities there, and it's going to really take it's going to take a fundamental change in how that is administered. I'll give you one example of something we're doing on this. We represent a bunch of SMR companies in several states, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and the legislature of Arizona, challenging a 1956 regulation that basically ignored a reform that Congress made in 1954, saying if you're a small and safe reactor, you don't need to get a construction operation permit. And those licenses are extremely time-consuming to get, very costly. And Congress said that if you're small and safe, you don't need to do that. And the agency has ignored that for 70 years. And so we're challenging them, saying, you need to not ignore what Congress told you to do. So that's only just one slice of it, and there are many other things that go into it. But I think fundamentally that's a regulatory problem that has to be overcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're rising in popularity because, one, nuclear, I think there are so many opportunities for technology development in that space. The same, to a certain extent, is true with geothermal, where we're taking advantage of resources that we never thought we'd be able to take advantage of here in the United States. We are a resource-rich country when it comes to geothermal, and both of these things provide baseload power, which is what you need if you want to build a data center. So instead of just talking about something because it makes us feel good, we're talking about it because it actually adds value to the grid in a really significant, easy to understand way. So I think that's part of why we're seeing them rise to the top. But I love what you brought up about the NRC, because I think it brings us back to this fundamental problem where we have to change the culture of how we think about federal permitting, because the end result has to be we're trying to get to yes. That has to be the goal. The goal should be to get to yes. The goal shouldn't be to delay forever and see what happens. It should be, hey, what do we need to do in terms of environmental mitigation or in terms of rethinking this project to get to yes on your permit in this timely fashion? And I think when we get to a place where we get to, it's kind of the big picture for permit by rule, right? If we can get to a place where the default answer is yes, then maybe we can get this whole bureaucracy to start thinking in a different way, because they have to think, okay, well, this is going to get approved in 6 months if I don't figure out how to make it work in the best way possible, so maybe I should figure it out. I think that's what we need.
Well, I'm glad you brought up, and we only have a couple more minutes here, I'm glad you brought up the need for a change in values, because I wanted to touch on something that impacts all of this stuff, which is there is a specter haunting American energy development, and it is called green lawfare. So in the last couple minutes here, I was wondering if, I'd love to hear just your takes on what the political challenge is to changing that culture.
It's an interesting challenge because politically, there's the outsized influence that green ENGO litigation has far outweighs their actual political clout as sort of a member of a coalition or a faction in a representative democracy. And this separates the environmental movement from almost everything else, is how effective they have been historically, going back to the 70s, in weaponizing the legal system to stop things from happening. If you go back to the seminal NEPA case, which is an anti-nuclear case called Calvert Cliffs, and Calvert Cliffs begins with a line from Judge J. Skelly Wright saying, "This is the first in what promises to be a flood of new environmental litigation." He said that like it was a good thing, which is kind of shocking to me. But that's been how that's worked out. And the courts really, and especially the Supreme Court, really have to come in and put some actual brakes on the ability of just anyone to go to court and the ability of courts to just do anything they want on environmental matters. Because until that changes, you have this anti-democratic lever that is so asymmetric that it really stops a lot of things from happening.
I just came back from Alaska and met with a whole range of project developers who sort of said, we're excited about this new renaissance and President Trump wants us to be able to build and take advantage of our resources again. And they said, we felt like we've spent the last 4 years under attack from somebody from California who came here for 2 weeks and decided we shouldn't be able to build. That's how they feel. And that's what happens so often when we have environmental groups airdrop into communities and stir up objections and stir up lawsuits. And I think the way to fix that is, one, to address standing, to ensure that folks have to be a part of a real substantive process they be involved in the comment period, be involved because they're from the community, changing that standing measure so that we can ensure we don't have completely divorced from the community groups coming in to try to derail projects. And then second of all, we have to deal with the sort of like loser pays issue, right? We know that when it comes to NEPA, like 85% of those cases get decided in favor of the government permit that was there to begin with, but those projects end up dying on the vine because they run out of funding. So we have to deal with the fact that there's no penalty for an environmental group to come and file a frivolous lawsuit. In fact, they often fundraise off it. So we got to change the system so it doesn't reward them for what is frankly bad behavior.
Okay, and we'll end it there. Thank you all so much. This was a great time.
Thank you. Thank you.